good evening, good evening, everybody. Hey. It is me, it is Eddie Phillips. I am here this hour for the Erudition Network's interactive Black History and Knowledge session. Please forgive us for a little bit of lateness today. Had some unexpected technical difficulties, but that's fine. Hey, we're here, and it's another Thursday. I hope you all had a great week. As we get ready to go into center myself a little bit better. There we go. Um, this session is done to provide knowledge and understanding history, to answer questions, to be there to answer those questions about history or just some topics that are happening currently that um, are the result of our history. The last few weeks it has been kind of hectic, but we've managed to try to keep these shows up and running. I'm sure some people will watch this later, but I'm happy for everyone who tunes in weekly to watch the and participate in the interactive session. So today, we're going to talk about some things. Um, but before I do that, let me talk about last week. Last week, I had my son, my 10-year-old, on, and I got really good feedback from that episode. It was a decision that I made to put him on unfiltered and to allow him to speak um, at his level of understanding about what we're dealing with in this world. And today, um, we are living in some interesting times that are very reciprocal of where we have been in the past. Um, and so I thank everyone who sent those positive responses in um, for Matthew, um, and took the time to listen. Sometimes it just takes you to take the time to listen and to talk. Hey, Daniel, I see you on here, and hey, feel free at any and everyone to interact, ask questions. So Daniel asked, "Are voter ID laws racist?" Now, there's a long history of that, Daniel, and I'm sure in our history of voting rights for African Americans, not just African Americans. Let's not just put it there. In the history of voting rights throughout this country, it used to be that you had to be rich, own land, male, um, in order for you to vote. Um, and then when we look at the history of that and what happened with that, you know, one of the egregious things that happened with voting rights and voter IDs. Um, let me ask you a question first. Let me just before I get into that, let me say yes, they can be racist. All things can be used um, in a racial way when the bureaucracy of this country. And the reason why I say that, and the reason why even we spoke a couple of weeks ago about critical race theory, in the way that the systemic issues happen in this country, so that even people who are not, say, racist, play into a racist system. So the judges, the politicians, and different ones who may not be racist allow racist things to happen. Back in the old South, there may have been people who lived in the community and had no problem with blacks or women or whatever voting. But the reality of it is that the society, right, the power institution didn't want it. And so they stood by and they allowed those issues to take place. There's a great book, and I have it around here somewhere, I believe. Yes. And you'll see me talk about this book a lot. And if you want a book that can kind of tell you where we are right now, read Dr. King's Why We Can't Wait. And then there's another book by Dr. King, Where Do We Go From Here? Read these to get those two books, right? They're on Amazon. You can find them online at Barnes and Noble. and follow the history of what was done with that, right? With the poll taxes, with the IQ test, with the intelligence test, with all of these things that kept people from being able to vote. So it's not necessarily that it's the ID. We could all have an ID. It's how you utilize that ID. And I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to send another one. Um, Today, I wanted to talk about, Daniel got right into it, and that's what I want with the interactive sessions. But today, I wanted to kind of focus a little bit on this thing that's been going on in the media for the last couple of days, and the historical understanding of what that is. And that's the idea of this missing white girl syndrome. Now, if you don't know, and I don't want to laugh about the fact of someone being killed. That's not my intention. But what happens, it kind of goes along with what you're talking about, Daniel, and the idea of a system. What we just talked about with the system, right? When you have a system or a systemic issue that works a certain way and people don't know how to get out of it, they will know that it's happening, but yet they will continue in letting the system do what it does because that's the normalcy, right? It was the question that we asked when we were looking at critical race theory about the normalcy of racism. And people say, well, why would you say that racism is normal? No, it shouldn't be. But to a system, it's a normal way and structure of it running. And so what happens is that things just continue despite the fact that we all know it's wrong. So when we look at this situation with the Petito young lady um, who who was killed, right? Um, we or whose body was found and was killed with her and her boyfriend or a significant other. Um, then you get an understanding as to how a system works. So she goes missing, and when she goes missing, and he goes missing, for after that, the whole country, right, has gotten behind it. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, everybody um, is looking and covering this story. Now you say, well, it's a tragedy, so it should be covered. But the idea of this whole missing white woman syndrome, and I saw Joy Reid brought it up. It really doesn't come from Joy Reid. It comes from a famous anchor. She passed away a couple of years ago, named Gwen Eiffel, and she coined that phrase about the media's obsession whenever white women or privileged white people go missing or killed or whatever, and it becomes this huge, um, sensational thing that happens in the news 24/7, all over, all over, all over. Now you say, well, why do we care? Why do we care about that? Why is that an issue? It's not the issue of the coverage of talking about a tragedy. It's the disproportionate part of covering it. We have in this country thousands, and we have known it for the past 15 to 20 years, of young Black women who are mysteriously vanishing in this country. There's campaigns, there are organizations that are out here that are dedicated to trying to find these young Black women. And often when young Black people or Black people are lost or can't be found, when you call the police or when you inform authorities, statistically, and what we've seen in several studies, is that the police automatically dismiss it as a drug problem, a gang problem, a spousal abuse or something or some. They always try to blow it off as if, well, they'll come back, or maybe they won't, or maybe they got caught up in something, and it's not really handled and it's not given a lot of press. As a matter of fact, even when these people are found to be killed, we don't get the coverage that you see that was done over the last couple of days. But this is not new. I remember doing during the beginning of the Gulf War, right? And the Iraqi War, right? In the early 2000s. And I remember how we had Jessica Lynch and we had the other black female soldier, Shoshana Johnson. And as a military person, both of them, being grabbed and taken, uh, it was tragic. But the coverage was all on Jessica Lynch, the blonde white girl, right? The coverage was so focused on Lynch that even though Johnson, and was the other woman, Lori Pistewa, she was a Native American. She was also taken, but they were so concerned about the rescue of Jessica Lynch, even to such a point that it made Jessica Lynch uncomfortable when she was actually rescued. So we have a sensational thing here that happens in the system, and it has been going on for quite some time. That's a good question. All right, so Daniel, you into it today. Hey, I'm with you. What would happen in recent years if we lost the Civil War? If we lost the Civil War, it's highly possible that America in itself probably would not exist as you know it, even if blacks were still put into slavery. And I will tell you why. Because we went over to Germany uh, during World War II. And though most of the ideas with World War II were not about necessarily um, the mistreatment of the Jews, it still changed the world and the idea of how people treated um, other folks. I don't think that a country that openly proclaims slavery and abuse can survive. We've seen that in multiple different sovereignties throughout the world, countries throughout the world, where warlords and dictators go in and savagely mistreat their populace, and the rest of the world joins in. And I like to believe that had America lost the Civil War, that would happen. But that's the reason why America didn't want to lose the Civil War, even to the point of folks in the Confederacy, right? Understanding that the idea of slavery wasn't going to last. How do we know that? Because toward the end of the Civil War, they themselves offered freedom to slaves who fought for for the Confederacy. And that went completely against the idea of what they were trying to fight for slavery. So it's just, I don't think that we would have survived. I agree with you. I've never seen a missing black woman on the news yet. I see missing white women on the news very often, very often. And the manipulation of that, what we really are talking about today, is the system of that, right? Um, I watched news anchors on black, white, whatever, talking about this. And I laughed at the idea that they were pushing this story, even though they know that this is a syndrome, this is an issue that the media has. The problem with the disproportionate coverage is that it radically changes the idea of what we see as important, what viewers see as important. It conditions us to think that the the missing white woman or missing white girl's life is more important than the person of color's life. Now, you could say, well, that Eddie, there is evidence to suggest that. I mean, we can go down the list. We could look at the what is it, Elizabeth Smarts, right? We can look at the Lacey Petersons. We can look at the Jessica Lynch. We can go on and on and on and name names. But if I were to ask you to name me a black female's name who was abducted or killed or taken and had not been found, they spent the better part of almost 20 years talking about John Benet Ramsey and who could have killed her, never to find who did kill her, right? But they wrote books, they did movies, The other frightening situation with that is that the issue of these things when it happens, it changes the law. They go so far to change the law for the abduction and the mistreatment of whites, where we know that there is a national problem with the abduction, abuse, and murder of people of color. Give you an example of that. When Megan Kanka, right, was taken, right, and abducted and murdered. This was back in the early 90s. They came up with a thing called Megan's Law, right? And what that did is it required law enforcement to let the public know, and you see it on your phones and every place else, about registered sex offenders in the area. But nobody talked about the other black young ladies who had been killed and murdered by sexual predators. No movement had been done. And there is numerous cases of it throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and we're talking about early 90s when this happened. But when this 7-year-old white girl was taken, all of a sudden things changed. Another case that changed things was Amber Hagerman. When Amber Hagerman, again in the 90s, right, was abducted and murdered, we came up with the Amber Alert. We have to find a way to understand why this obsession is so strong and why we have to be able to 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 challenge it when we see it and say, "Hey, okay, we hear you. However, let's look at some of these other things that are going on, and let's focus on what's happening in our own communities." Daniel, okay. Do you think flying a Confederate flag masks? I think what you're saying. Do you think that flying the Confederate flag masks racist? Just so you know, my family and I don't fly the Confederate flag, but I'm just curious. So the Confederate flag, great question. The history behind that flag is disgusting. Um, it may have started with the flag, of the Confederate Army of Lee's army. Uh, but what later happened, what we later see, is that Lee had told them um, when the end of the civil when he surrendered to bury that flag, right? So when he understood that this was a lost cause, this was not something that we should be celebrating, and he told them to bury the flag. However, coming around the 1960s, 100 years after the war, right, and coming around the anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation around 1863, coming into 1963, uh, it really became another symbol against blacks. Now, it became a symbol of racism. And a lot of people don't want to see that. Now, had you been flying that flag in 1887 or whatever, yes, maybe we could say that this is your ancestry, this is your lineage. But when the man who created that flag, right, the Confederate flag said that it was the white man's flag. It was the flag of the white man way back in the 1800s. And they dug it back up to proclaim it as such. So much so that you see some Klan KKK uniforms have the Confederate flag on it. So we shouldn't deceive ourselves as seeing this flag for what it is. A flag is a symbol of allegiance, right? That's what it is. We carry that flag in honor to show our allegiance and our support. So when you carry that flag, you're saying, right, that this is what I support in all of its horror. So yes, it can be used as a racist symbol. But I think Daniel, as you're providing questions today, that's awesome. I greatly appreciate it because that's what this interactive was about. Keep asking questions, keep going, keep going, keep going. Uh, We're here to answer those questions and provide information for it. Give me one moment as I put this out here. But as I was saying, uh, we're in a situation right now where we seem to um, have so many systemic problems. We're seeing it in jobs, we're seeing it in schools, we're seeing it everywhere. And a lot of people do not want to talk about it. A lot of people want to get away from it, right? They want to avoid it because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. And one of the other things about it, he said, thus the flag carries the white man's burden. I don't know if it's much of a burden, um, as much as it can be a curse. Um, the history behind that flag is is scary, right? Many people have died with that flag flying, over them, and so or under them. And so when we consider that, if it's like asking, is the word nigger um, racist? Yes, it's racist, um, and it should not. We should not use make it lose its meaning. It doesn't matter who says it. No, I don't think that he is. Uh, but then again, you know, racism. Dave, let me clear something up about racism. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that a black person can be racist? That's a straight question. Everybody out here, do you think that a black person can be racist? I'll give you a couple of moments to answer that. Seems like somebody loves to call whenever we're on. Hey, hey, Grandma, how you doing? Anybody got an answer for that? Do you think that a black person can be racist? Well, don't seem like anybody wants to bite to that. So let me tell you that racism is a deeper thing than what I think most Americans face or understand. What do you mean by in different ways? Because I think this is what I believe, and I think that evidence shows this. I believe that racism can be in anyone. I think that racism is a accepted condition by certain people, and then it becomes an affliction, and it stays with them. I believe that racism is introduced to you in small bits, and then what happens is you accept it. And once you accept it as a normalcy, it becomes a part of your life. And it dictates the things you do, the things you say, the ways you act. So, in answering your question about Biden, I don't see in his character, in his actions, that he is racist. However, I can go look through past presidents, not just Trump, because that's an easy mark. I can go look through past presidents and see actions that indicate a racist mentality, not bigoted, not implicitly biased, racist. Racist meaning that you have power to affect the lives of others, and you choose to do that in a way to harm others based on race or culture or what or other that you see as different based on race. Black people can be racist, and there's a big thing out here that I've heard for years. Black people can't be racist. They don't have power. Negative. You can be. So you say not racist black people hate whites. Racist white people hate black people. So let me ask you, is there any ambiguity there? Are there white people who are racist against white people? And are there black people who are racist against black people? Because it may not be a black and white issue, and it's not. If I to divulge to you, it's not. Even in the idea of supremacy in this country, white supremacy is not wholly conditionally white. It has never been wholly conditionally white. You go back and you look at the slave narratives, and you go back and you go look at slavery, and you will note that the slave owner had black people on the plantation who ran other black people. You will note in history black people who hate other blacks, right? Dislike them and feel that slavery would have been a better thing for them to be in. There is a book, and I will post that in the in here when we're done with today's session, in which a black slave was allowed to write a book advocating for blacks to stay in slavery. His master published the book because we also forget that the masters also apprenticed their slaves out. They got them to learn skills, right? Like blacksmith, and they knew how to do fine machines. All of these different things that they knew that were elite skills. They got them taught. Some did mathematics, right? They kept books, and the master would loan them out or apprentice them out, right? Start a business for them, and they would make money for the master. And so they learned that money, they followed that money. They thought they were more privileged, and they looked down on what they saw as their lesser brethren. Christopher said, I feel like racist has become it is a very simplified term because many of us don't really focus on what it really truthfully means. Racism, right, is not just about the idea of I don't like you because you're black. Racism is the ability to take that bias, that bigotry, that hatred, whatever it is, and to inflict some condition on another person based on their race. Could racism be looked at as narcissism? Well, a narcissist sees himself as above reproach on the outside. Narcissism comes from the idea of having a very uh, having an inferiority complex. Most narcissists have a problem in thinking that they're less than, so they compensate by doing things to make themselves the center of attention. Racism, right, is not necessarily that. That's a more internal thing. Racism is an external action, Eddie, that happens because someone goes out and does something externally to harm another. I would kind of say I'm a racist against whites because I can't stand how my generation's grandparents and great parents allow hatred to blacks. So yes, it's definitely possible. Yes, and that's the problem, right? One of the issues with what you're talking about, Daniel, right there, is the fact that we don't talk about race in the way that we should. We're not honest about it. We don't go out and say the things that we need to say about it. And because we don't do that, um, we wind up having these issues where we start to dislike each other. That's sin, right? Of watching, because that's a sin too. Not just the act of doing something, but the fact that you're watching it be done to someone, and say nothing about it. That omission, right? That idea that, okay, well, it's not me. And getting back to what we were talking about earlier, right? That can create a huge problem in your psyche, a psychosis, because you can't understand how a person can tell you that we live in the greatest, freest country in the world, but yet we can go and sit and watch and see a scene like George Floyd, where a man can quite literally put his knee on another man and feel his life ebb out of him. And then we have a cognitive dissonance, right? Or we create a cognitive dissonance where we say, well, and we try to make excuses for it. Or on the other side, we start to dislike ourselves, hate ourselves, be angry with ourselves, try to find some way to rationalize the horrors of what we've just seen. And the younger generation is it's harder because we're seeing more because technology is allowing us to capture more. Hey, keep those questions coming. It's a really great discussion. Um, and I appreciate it. I'm not motivated on Erudition a lot of times by how many people come on live. I'm more motivated by us talking and getting these dialogues out here. The purpose of this session has always been to have an interactive discussion on Black history, on knowledge. And that's what we're doing today. And it allows us to be able to have a conversation with each other without people pointing fingers, without people getting mad. And that is what we need to be doing. And we need to get our young people to get more involved and more understanding that we can have these conversations. Last week, when I had my 10-year-old on, he talked about it. It touched me when he said, you get afraid to go out. He's 10 years old. But what are we seeing in the world? And so when we see these things, and like Daniel's pointing out, we see these things and we dislike them. But who do we talk to? If I live in a house full of racists, or I live in a community with people who are quick to say those Black people don't know a darn thing, or they degrade people of color, or I live in a Black community where everybody says, man, white people don't understand us. I hate all white people, whatever. Who do I talk to? How do I get an understanding? And so my experience in the military, I used to tell people that the military is like a fish bowl. You can't get out, and you're forced to be in there. And some people die in their mind and their spirit or whatever because they refuse, right, to go along with what's going on in there and work with others and have this system that works. So they die. And then there are others who live forever, like that goldfish who just never dies, no matter the fact that you didn't feed them, and no matter and the other fish don't try to eat each other. Why? Because they learn to get along. They learn to understand how to be with each other. Can political affiliation reflect your views on race? I don't think so. I think we're making it that way, Christopher. I think that we're making it a situation like that. You know, recently, a couple of weeks ago, I posted a post on Facebook, right? And I'm going to see if I can pull it up while I'm talking about this. I posted a post on Facebook about a history book because I'm constantly reading books, and I had pulled up a history book. Uh, I just bought it because I wanted it's another book to have and to go and reference and go through. And I noticed in the book that the writer was a white woman, no problem with that, and a military. She was an admiral, I believe, in the Navy, and they wrote this history book. But at the beginning of the book, or in a part of the book where they talk about the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, right? It was crazy because the lady wrote this huge part about the Democratic Party. And I'm going to share that with you because I want you all to see that. I want you to see that because that's a great question, Chris. Great, great question. And I want you to see this if you didn't see it. Give me one moment. All right. So if you can read it right here, right? And what it's saying is, it's saying much of our American history has been altered to change and reflect the political ideology. Democrats have attempted to bury their sordid history of repression, segregation, violence, and murder towards blacks, while unfairly blaming Republicans for unfound racist policies. And I'm not going to read all of it, but basically, what she was saying was that this was a political thing. And this was the introduction to the founding of the Ku Klux Klan, the first Klan, one of the most murderous bodies in the history of America. And she gave it a Democratic banner. Now, was she wrong in the history that they were Dixiecrats back then? No. But was she wrong in understanding that in the 60s, when Lyndon Johnson, right, went inside those bills, that he said we will lose the South for the next, what I think he said, 50 years. So she's wrong in the fact that those so-called Dixiecrats back in the day then became Republicans because the Republicans were telling them what they wanted to hear. We will keep those blacks, keep the crime. When Nixon started his war on drugs, right? When you had Reagan furthering the war on drugs, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago. All of these things became political actions that had a racial undertone. Ronald Reagan launched his presidential campaign in Washoba County. And if you don't know what Washoba County is, this is where the 3 civil rights workers were uncovered, were dug up in a dam after they had been killed and murdered. And he went there and launched his Republican presidential campaign for president. Why? And his speech was about what? The war on drugs, the war on crime. It's all code. So when we ask, can political parties affirm or reflect some things on race? Yes, they can, but it's because they choose to. So that's a great question, Daniel, and I'm going to tell you what it is. Nobody is born racist. A baby does not know anything about color. How do we know that? We know that back in the early days of this country, when slavery was going on, that whites used to let their babies wet nurse on black women, slaves. And there were wet nurses who, that was their sole job, to take care of the children. They didn't see that as a problem. And to show you how crazy that is, Malcolm X said racism drives people completely crazy. The same white master and madam would let their child suckle on a black slave and would beat the skin off that slave if they ate off of their plate, or if they laid in their bed, or if they touched them, or guessed. And there's documented accounts of this in the slave narratives. There were things that the slaves could not do, but yet you could suckle, you could feed your child, or you were fed off of a black slave. It's taught. Young white boys were able to go run around with young black slaves. There's documented. Frederick Douglass talks about it. Booker T. Washington talks about it. That was not a problem until a certain age, and then you were told, no, you don't. So this was a taught thing. So when we ask ourselves, Why do racist people allow themselves to be racist? They're taught that. I told you, since I said it earlier, it starts small, it's fed to you small, and it infects you over time. At least that's my theory. Race is a game and the way people use it to further themselves in many ways. It's a good point, Sean Anthony. I guess it can be a game. Um, and it is often used as a game. Uh, but the argument to that is that sometimes that so-called racist game uh, has cost people their lives. So was Lyndon Johnson racist? That's a great man. Thank you. Thank you going, man, today. And I'm happy for it. Listen, Lyndon Johnson is a unique character in history. Lyndon Johnson was an FDR loving Democrat. He was a what's the word? He's practical, right? He was from Texas. He was Southern, but he believed in the New Deal tactics and he believed that the country must move forward. He understood that history could not continue, as we mentioned earlier, when you asked the question about if they had lost the Civil War. If we lost the Civil War, what would we be? We have to understand that this country, it only has moved forward because of people who are willing to move it forward. There are some who were deadlocked in the principle of bigotry, racism, and uh, there's no way we could have moved forward without it. Without you can argue with Teddy Roosevelt, but Teddy Roosevelt did some things that kept this country moving forward. You can argue with FDR, but he kept it moving forward. Now, all of these men did things that, by definition of what we said earlier, were racist. Teddy Roosevelt turned his back on black troops who had fought with him and sided with the white establishment of stripping them of their pensions and everything else. Teddy Roosevelt also, when Booker T. Washington wanted to come to the White House, uh, he made negative, nasty comments to certain people against Booker T. Washington and having a black person there, right? He also liked to talk about how his grandmother was a Confederate and he was Southern, and that was always a part of him. FDR had a wife who loved to go out and associate and try to do things for minorities, blacks, and people of color. But FDR would only push it so far. He was practical. And so we get back to Johnson, he was the same way. But he understood that you cannot continue a racist system and thrive in the current world. If you want to know how he could, because he would still slip and say nigga, right? There's documentation of that because that's the way he was raised. But he understood that we can't continue to do this because the Russians, the Chinese, the other people in the world will see America as a non-thriving country that says one thing and does another. That's the other issue, the political issue of that and how it affected the world. If you go and you read things about Malcolm X and what Malcolm X tried to do before he died, or before he was killed and assassinated, I should say, and trying to get the UN involved in what was happening with blacks in this country. The pressure was on the United States president to do something because even the Russians were saying, how could you call yourself the leader of the free world? And we see dogs and fire hoses being turned on minorities in your country. It sold communism. So there's a part of that too. Hope that answers some of your questions. Hey, you all are coming with it today, and I'm happy. I'm happy to answer these questions. This is what I wanted this session to be. So, hey, keep going. Whatever's in your mind, whatever you think, you know. We started just talking about the systems and systemic racism. We've talked about many different things on here. Oh, that's Pastor Raisin. Good to see you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. But one of the things that I like for young people to understand is that despite the fact that there's a lot of racism out here, ethnocentrism, and all of these things that are going on, you don't have to embrace that. You can be practical and understand too. Because once you open the door for understanding, right? Once you say to yourself, hey, I don't know everything. I've never met a black person. I've never sat down with them. I can't make an assumption about them. Um, then maybe we could be, we'd have a better conversation. Every Thursday, Daniel, every Thursday, unless I announce it, something that's come up scheduling wise, we will be here every Thursday. We do have some other things that we've been trying to get off the ground, but every Thursday we'll be on here for the interactive. Well, my grandma said, should parents teach their children about racism? Yes, yes. Because if we teach our children what racism really is, right? Not the as Chris said earlier, Christopher said earlier, not the coin can, oh, that's racist. If we really teach them where that racism is coming from, we can change people's young folks' minds. And that's really what we're striving to do because if we can get young people to start talking about racism as it is without this accepted bull that people tell you that blacks can't be racist, white can't be racist, and this and how that's racist and everything's racist. If we actually talk about it as something that is being used to make someone be an other and to create an action that affects that other or the people who you perceive to be the other, then we'll do better. We'll do better. So when we talk about all of the stuff going on right now, where people, I don't want my kids learning Black history. I don't want my kids to listen. The more history we know, the more we talk to each other about the things that have been done in the past, then we will learn the us in them. Because see, even though there was lynchings, I was telling somebody this recently, even though there were lynchings and there were murders and there were things that were done back in the day, there were whites and blacks. Go and look up the Black and Tan movement. Go and look up the people who came together after the Civil War. Black, American Indian, white, who wanted to live in peace together and tried to until politics, until the people in the country came in and tried to enforce a different way of thinking. Is it wrong for Black people to discard Black history? As I get older, my peers always change the subject. They call it depressing. So you hit on a issue right there, Christopher, that I've had discussions with my family about. It is depressing. Nobody wants to focus on lynchings and murders and the way that you were treated in the society or your ancestors were treated in society. But people who don't know their history, right, will never know where they're going or where they've come from. We have to know who we are. That's everyone. That's everyone. And embracing the idea of Black history. There's so much Black history people don't know. There's so many things that have happened in our culture, not just America, right? Coming out of Africa, the diaspora, how our people left out of Africa, how mankind migrated out of Africa, and so much has been closed and pushed away from us, so that we don't understand it, that we attack each other for foolishness. And if our ancestors could look at it, could speak to us, they would tell us this is foolishness, foolishness. So we have to embrace that history. And though your peers may get tired of hearing it, people are always thirsty for knowledge. One of my biggest things that I'm constantly doing on social media is having to decipher and tell people, because people put out memes and ideas about things that they haven't researched, so that you could get the real history behind it and grow your own knowledge. Great question. How do you teach children not to be racist in a 99% white community? One of the things that you have to do is get people, your friends, who, when you hear a friend say something about, and it happens in the black community, right? Doesn't If they say something bigoted, right? They say, "Hey, this that I saw a picture of this black dude. He looked like this, whatever, whatever, right?" Or a white person, the black person says something about a white person. You have to stop them, and it's like, man, why would you say that? And give them an opposing view, right? It's just debate, an opposing view. Hey, okay, so you say that, but what about this person? What about that situation? That's why it's so important to have your mind and expand your thought and go out and read as much as you can on things you don't know about and grow your knowledge. And then you can start to, just like you see the Christians witness to people, you can start witnessing to people. Everybody's not going to hear you. You can talk to 10 people and only reach one, but that one is important because that one will go out and reach somebody else. So it's important to start doing it that way. Since racism has become so commonplace, a history of many forms of racism have been hidden. Is it possible that racism can evolve, or it's been evolving for thousands of years, right? If you go back and you look at uh, the history of this world, it's been evolving for thousands of years, and it is always, always manipulated by those who feel threatened, who feel like they are losing something. It doesn't matter if you're talking about the Moors. It doesn't matter if you're talking about parts of Africa, the Phoenicians, the Egyptians. When people come down and they treat you a certain way, or they tell you you're less than, that less than mentality that they're pushing on you is to subjugate you and to get you into a position where they can dominate you. And dominion is a huge issue behind this, because we know from the Spanish, when they came over to deal with the American Indian, right? They came over to dominate, and they read to them and told them, "We are here to bring God with us to take dominion of this area, of this place." So it is a huge thing in that. Oh, cool, Daniel. Hey, thank you for coming in and participating. You know, we really appreciate those questions. And hey, man, please share the episode. See you next week. Yes, they are terrorists, and it's not just the history of the KKK and its old history. It's also what they do even to this day. When the KKK says that they no longer, we're not a hate group, but we have KKK members that go shoot in Jewish synagogues. When you have KKK members who will drag black people to their death, when you have KKK members who are bashing uh, black men upside the head with pipes and poles, as we saw in Charlottesville, you understand that no matter what you're saying to me, you are still a hate group, and you still conspire to do things against minorities or people of color. When they marched around uh, without their sheets and said, "Jews will not replace us," all of this is still hate and, again, fear. So since racism is built on the fact that people believe they are above a race, people, or class, can racism ever be stopped permanently? So that's the rub, right? We can never say that we can stop everybody. But what we can, as I just said to Daniel, but we want to change as many minds as we can. System didn't just start overnight. Thousands of years have gone into the uh, mitigating and making uh, people of color, especially in this country, hundreds of years. In England, thousands of years. We've had these situations for a very long time, and so step by step, we have to try to bring people in and have these discussions. That's what erudition is about, and to be able to share our history in multiple different ways. That's my goal and what I try to do, and come up with ways for us to do that so that we can have these discussions. Good question. Does wealth equal bigotry and racism? I think it can. Um, I think it can. I think that when you deal with uh, racism, you also have to understand that there is a certain part of society, right, who once they get money, wealth, affluency, right, they always want to look down on those who are below them. And when we have a society that has marginalized people of color, they are the ones that are usually below. So when I say that you have blacks who are bigoted and racist against blacks, you have affluent black people who are completely disassociated from the average black person in our cities and our communities and our youth, and they don't know how to connect with you. I remember when Ben Carson was running for president. Ben Carson put an ad on the radio stations that was "This is Ben" and trying to put rap, and it sounds so contrived. It sounded like a Saturday Night Live sketch because he had been so removed, right, and that he couldn't. That's how he thought he had to communicate with with young black people. Would we have folks who are getting up here, Thomas Sowell, different Candace Owens, who talk about how Hitler wasn't so bad and Nazism wasn't so bad? When you have those situations, right, you start to understand that once I get a little bit of something, now I'm away from you. Most of these people started at a level that they struggled to get up, just like what any of us would struggle. But once they got above that, they felt like, well, I don't have to help you because nobody helped me, which is a lie usually, because everybody has helped in some way. In some way. Lastly, I'll tell you, Baba Dick Gregory, before he died, Dick Gregory said that he always made sure he went back and did shows at events for Black people because those were the people who fed him when nobody else would feed him. So, yes, wealth can play into bigotry and racism. I think we got one more question we could take. Then we're gonna have to get on off of here. But if you guys have one more. If not, that's fine. Hey, it's been an hour. We got on here a little late. I'm so happy that you all got on and you asked these questions. This has been a very engaging hour, and it does my heart well because this is what I want for the interactive. Um, I was kind of shocked because we don't typically get it the way we did today. And I thank you for your questions. Please, 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 even if you're a young person that's going to school taking history classes, and there's something in your history class that you thought didn't sit well with you or you didn't get a full understanding. Hey, even bringing that on Thursdays are good. I appreciate all of the questions today. It was a very engaging hour. Um, and it keeps it moving, keeps it exciting, and I hope you get some knowledge from it. So I'm getting ready to sign on off of here. Thank you all for joining me again on this Thursday. Uh, I will see you next week, uh, and I thank you, and I appreciate you coming on and spending time with me for the interactive Black History and Knowledge session. Please share and like on Facebook. Share this episode with your friends and people, even you all who watch it late. Please share, 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 share. Let's grow together. All right. Thank you all. Have a blessed and wonderful week. Rest of your week.